Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode on Solving the People Puzzle. Today I have the privilege of sitting with Penny Adams. Penny is a registered industrial psychologist and has reached amazing career heights, including head of human capital at a very famous South African brand. Let's dive in. This is Solving the People Puzzle, where we discuss all things talent acquisition and human resource management. Penny, welcome to the Whammy podcast. It's amazing to have you in studio. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Francois. How are you doing?
Fantastic. I'm so excited to finally have this conversation with you. We've been speaking about it for many, many weeks. So it feels like months. It's awesome to have you here. Penny, before we jump into the episode, maybe a bit of an intro to the audience about who is Penny Adams?
Sure. Penny Adams is a human resources or human capital specialist, professional, rather.
Yeah.
I'm also a registered industrial psychologist, and I've essentially built my entire career in the human capital space. So, I'm an HR professional through and through. I've dabbled here and there, but truly to the core, I'm an HR professional,
yes.
As well as obviously an industrial psychologist.
I don't often get to have an episode with fellow industrial psychs. And when I do, I kind of always go to this question, why back then did you decide to go and study industrial psychology?
So it wasn't an outright decision, Francois. And I think this is something you'll get from many industrial psychologists. I mean, it's certainly a story I've heard, repeated many times in different ways. But I've always had a passion for people, working with people. And, coming out of university, or coming out of high school rather, wasn't really clear in terms of what to study. And I somehow found myself doing industrial psychology at third year level. I won't tell you the backstory because it's quite long. But third year industrial psychology student, and decided I actually really enjoy this. I want to work with individuals in the context of work. I want to understand humans and how they behave, what really motivates them, what excites them, what energizes them. And also how then do we help them when things are not working. So that's really where the love of industrial psychology was born. And I made the decision very early on that I will take it all the way to registration. The
Well
journey
done.
wasn't straight or direct,
Yeah.
but we're here now.
Listen, I love what you're saying because I often, when people ask me, I say, for me, it was an accidental profession. And it's crazy, like you say, and I agree, so many IOPs never in high school thought, that's what I want to become. I know what it is. Let me go and do it straight off the bat. Like you kind of navigate through the world of studying and tertiary education and kind of like people, and you end up in HR, and then, here's the stream industrial psychology. And then even I remember up to my fourth year, I still didn't know really what we do. And then you kind of go into masters, and then the big reality is you hit the world of work, right? And then you're like, I can't remember studying all of this that I'm being exposed to now.
100%. I mean, for me to even get to masters and register ultimately, like I said, it wasn't a straight route. I went into the world of work to really understand who I am, and understand, okay, as much as I love working with people, what does that really mean? What is it that I'm going to be doing while I'm working with people? What value am I bringing? So I had to learn that about myself. And in the back of my mind, I knew industrial psychology, yes, I enjoy it, but let me first understand the world of work, understand myself in that, and then I will continue with this journey, very exciting journey. So when I eventually went back into formal education and did my honors, etc., I really knew and understood what industrial psychology was in a way that I didn't when I initially came across the profession. Yeah.
I love that. Few individuals, and I want to call it a privilege, few individuals have the privilege of going into work and then go back to studying. And I guess it just makes so much more sense because you've got that practical experience.
True. I mentor honors and master's students, predominantly in industrial psychology as well as in human resource management. And a question that I'm faced with a lot of the time is, should I do industrial psychology all the way to master's level? What are the benefits of being a registered industrial psychologist? And I find that it's not a very easy question to answer. So what I usually leave these youngsters with is it's okay to take your time. It's okay to really explore a little bit before you make that decision. Because once you commit, you need to be committed. Getting to registration, it's not an easy path. So if you are going to do it, you really need to commit and understand why you want to do it.
Yeah.
What is it going to do for you and your career? So I think for me, that's really one of the things I try to leave these young students or young aspiring industrial psychologists, even human resource specialists with. Yeah.
Well done. Yeah. I think perspective is so important. Your career really is a journey.
True.
And 10 years experience takes 10 years. Now, Penny,
It can feel like 20.
it can. Or 2. Depends where you are.
Depending.
Penny, I love that we're taking the conversation into what we actually want to speak about today. And at the back end of that, you speak about experience, you speak about exposure and expectation management. Now, audience, today, for those of you following, and you would know that the Solving the People podcast is all about giving you practical tips, techniques, and tools to help you improve your HR practices from today. And so what we are going to be doing is we're going to take the employee attraction and selection journey straight up to onboarding. And Penny and I are going to share our thoughts and experiences around what to do and what not to do from our personal perspective and experience on 6 categories, starting with job design. So good moves, bad moves, aha moments, mistakes, whatever comes to mind, Penny, from our perspective around. Let's start with job design. So job design is the architecture side of creating the job from a job profile or a job description perspective, crafting what we're looking for when we're hiring for an individual. So what are some good moves and mistakes that you've seen in terms of job design?
So I have to first, call out the obvious, which is it starts with a strategy, which will then inform what our organization needs to look like. So the structure of the organization. And then from there, we determine what jobs do we need.
Strategy, structure, people.
100%. So that's a very important flow. So when we get to the job designing piece, this is where it becomes exciting, because this is where we define the type of roles that we need in our organization, but that will then inform the kind of individuals we want, the kind of skills that we need to bring in, the kind of experience that we want to see in our organization. And that starts to shape also then our understanding of, okay, if we are thinking about our business, this is the profile of the person we want.
Yeah.
We want somebody who's dynamic, or we want somebody who's focused, who's able to deliver, depending on obviously the type of organization that we have. So job design is so important. It's so critical. And what I found is that job design sometimes happens in the background, and where not all the role players are present. So what is key is ensuring that everybody that needs to be part of the conversation is included. It doesn't have to be all at the same time. Of course, we need to manage, people's availability, etc. But it's important that the key players are involved in that process. Who's the key player? It's your business partner. So the manager who's involved, whether the one who's overseeing the role or the one who's managing the role directly. It's, of course, your human capital management professional. And then sometimes it's even individuals that are already in the organization fulfilling that role.
Yeah.
Because they are close to the role. They are fulfilling it on a daily basis. So they have a unique perspective. So you want to ensure that you really bring those individuals into the conversation when you're designing a job. If it's a brand new job, you may not have an incumbent. So you really have to take the lead from, okay, in our business, this is what we need. What is out there in the industry? Who are we comparing and matching against?
Yes.
So it's doing that type of benchmarking as well, right? But ultimately, what do we want to do with the job? We want to be able to bring in the right talent.
Yes.
So our job needs to be clear. It needs to be concise. It needs to cover all the important elements.
Yes.
And that's really the importance of job design. It does get overcomplicated, and, people overcomplicate it sometimes for various reasons. But at the very simple core, that's what it is. That's what we're trying to do.
I love what you're saying. I'm going to try and summarize. A massive mentor and good friend of mine, Fred Guest, always used to say, it's all about the job, not about the person first. And so I'm hearing you say strategy. Strategy is key. Why are we bringing someone in? It needs to fit into a strategic outcome or an initiative that the business needs to achieve. From there, often it gets seen as this back office, boring admin. Let's just quickly tick some boxes. Let's get it done. I already have the individual in mind who I want to go and headhunt, friend, colleague, peer, family member, whatever the case might be. And so we skip a really, really critical part because, and this is HR 101, but it's so important for us to bring this up because I see from our perspective here at Whamley, so many organizations who get this wrong. They don't focus on what are the skills and the outcomes of this role. What is this individual going to be measured on? What does success look like when we find this person in terms of this job being in line with the strategy? So we kind of quickly accelerate through the job design process. We copy and paste. We don't think skills and outcomes, desired outcomes in mind. And then often that messes up the recruitment process because that document or whatever you want to call it becomes the foundation of recruitment. Your ad gets built from it. Screening happens from it. Comparing and fairly differentiating and discriminating between candidates is based off that document. Penny, so often I've heard line managers go, no, this candidate is fine. And then we're like, but your job profile said 5 years experience. He's only got 2. No, it's okay. Like, okay, but why did we say 5? Yeah. So I think crafting it, really having the right role players in the room. If you don't have the job in the organization, benchmarking with other organizations that might be doing it, really researching it. And I think this is a critical part of the HR professional's job as well, is to be skillful at doing this, facilitating those conversations, asking the SMEs in the room the right questions with the structure of the job design in mind so that we can actually get to a document that makes sense.
And reiterating the why. Why is it important? Often people don't want to participate because the relevance is lost on them.
Yes.
So as HR professionals, we need to reiterate the importance of doing the exercise. Yes, it may feel like admin, but it will save us time later on, which becomes quite crucial. And it will help us progress a very important process, which is to bring in talent into our business.
Yeah. I often, from a mistakes perspective, I see organizations listing a wish list of unrealistic expectations. I need 5 years experience in technology that's only 2 years old. Or I need a PhD in X, Y, and Z, but I'm only going to pay 30,000 Rand. Like these crazy expectations. So audience listening, watching on YouTube, really go and look at your documents, go and look at your job profiles, job descriptions, whatever you want to call them, and go and benchmark and understand if they're still realistic. And if they can help you attract talent that looks like this in some way.
Yes. Also, just to your point, you can't hire a graduate and ask for 3 years work experience.
Exactly.
So that should already be telling you that there's something wrong in the way that role has been designed.
Correct.
If you're hiring a graduate, you're bringing somebody who's just finished a degree.
They've got no experience. Penny, now that's the job side of things, super important, but equally, there's the organization side of things, which touches on the brand and the value proposition. What have you seen and what's your experience around this concept of EVP, brand, what we portray to the outside in terms of what you are joining when you say yes to the offer?
So, Francois, my experience has been, and this is coming from, my experience and the organizations I've worked with and been exposed to. You'll find that an organization has a really great employee value proposition, but it's not clearly articulated, especially in the market where we are engaging talent. Just bringing it back to this conversation. So the EVP is there. We have all these wonderful different components that make up the EVP. This is what we promise. But in terms of articulating that and getting it out to the market, to candidates, it's very difficult. And even more difficult sometimes internally. So you'll find that inward looking, organizations struggle, to fully package an EVP even to their existing workforce and say, guys, remember, we may have hired you 5 years ago, but these things are still relevant today, or this is how we've evolved them over time, to speak to the current need and the current trends that we're seeing as your employer. So EVP, it's so essential. As the world has changed, candidates are asking questions that they weren't asking before.
Correct.
They have a level of awareness in terms of what organizations can and can't do for them, and what they expect as candidates and potential employees. So it's so important to have an EVP that's well crafted, that's well communicated, that's present even at the point when we are trying to bring the talent into our business. Yeah. And that goes hand in hand with employer branding. So if we have a clear brand, a brand value, and we know what our brand stands for, it becomes easier to then craft an EVP that will complement that so that it's a full offering. When I look at an organization, I say, oh my goodness, this organization, I've seen it, here and there, but now that I'm looking at potentially engaging as a candidate, it's clear to me what it is that they're offering, what they're putting on the table before they even invite me for an interview. Yes. And you don't necessarily have to put out all the benefits you have available, in the market, because that's obviously IP that you don't want to share outside of your business necessarily. But there's a way of packaging it in such a way that it's compelling
and engaging.
That it's engaging.
Yes.
That when a candidate sees it, it's relatable, and they're like, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind engaging with this company or this brand further. Yeah,
I love that. Mistakes I've seen. Firstly, is you should start by asking yourself, do you have one? Have you crafted an EVP? And to make it really practical, because often I look at EVPs similar to culture projects or values projects. Yes. Or, like it needs to be this highly fluffy, theoretical. Let's get all the industrial psychs involved, all the consultants involved. No, it should be really practical.
Yes.
What do we stand for? What do we offer? What is our brand all about? And how does that influence you, Mr. Candidate, joining us? Yes. And then from there, after you've crafted it, I often see organizations don't operationalize it. They don't take it into the business and make it practical. If we think the hiring process, the very first touch point the candidate has with you, that's where their engagement with your brand really becomes real. They've seen you on billboards. They might have seen you on TV if you're a really big brand. They might have spoken about you at a braai. But when they start applying, that's when it starts. Yeah. And that experience can't be a 180 or in direct contradiction to what your EVP stands for. So HR professionals should be very mindful of carefully going and deep diving into every touch point of the candidate journey and evaluating if that is in line with the brand. If we say we're a future-focused, tech-driven business, which is a nice label to have, right? But you've got 9 steps in your hiring process and it takes 70 days to fill a vacancy. You're not delivering on your promise. No. It's not tech-focused if I ask you to upload your CV 7 times or log into 8 different portals to get into an interview, right? So I think craft it, communicate it, embed it, operationalize it, and then continue to refine it. Yes. Often values, same thing, get designed and crafted, they go up against the wall, they never get spoken about again. They're so generic. We're all about integrity. We're all about honesty, collaboration, great buzzwords. What does it look like?
How do we every day live those values? Exactly. How do we every day bring that EVP to life? If we are saying one of the promises we're making to you as an organization is continuous learning.
Yeah.
Practically, what does that mean?
Yeah. Is there a budget for your development?
Yes. And when you walk into our business, we expect that you're going to spend time with your manager, putting together a learning plan.
Yeah.
Highlighting those things we may have already picked up during the recruitment process that are developmental areas.
Yes.
And saying, this is what we picked up. We obviously hired you because you have great potential, experience, etc. But these are the gaps we've seen. And in line with our EVP, please make sure that you and your manager are crafting a development plan that speaks to how we're going to close these gaps. Very practical.
Very practical.
It doesn't have to wait until 6 months into the person's journey with you that you're now starting to think about these things. No.
Or a 200,000 Rand course either.
Absolutely.
On the job, what is the environment creating for continuous learning?
What do we have available? What is at your disposal that you can tap into? Where you don't have to go and sign up to do some really elaborate course outside of the organization. We could have a very robust e-learning offering.
Correct.
Tap into that. This is what we have. Plug it into your development plan. Make that EVP come to life.
100%.
That's it. Yeah.
Penny, the next part of it is the experience of the employee, right? So we've now touched on it. I start engaging with the brand. I've often seen the experience of the candidate, as much as organizations say they're different, the experience from my perspective is quite similar. What do I mean by that? How we apply, the way we get feedback, the ghosting that often happens, the CV that goes into the abyss and I never hear back, the step I take during the application process that I don't get feedback on, the fact that it's really long, it's impersonal. Like these are like the generic comments that we observe often that is part of the experience of the candidate. Now, you mentioned earlier 2025, it's a different kind of candidate. They are a consumer of your brand. They, through social media, get encouraged to speak up and to be quite assertive around what they want, especially if you're skilled. You have a choice. The power distance between the employer and the employee is not that big anymore, that gap. And so there's an opinion and there's needs and wants.
And also there's this concept of personal branding. People today, candidates today, have a very good understanding of personal branding and what that means. So if I'm a brand, and this is what I stand for, my values, these are the skills I bring, this is what I've done in previous roles, organizations, and I know I can make an impact in your business. I am putting that all together and saying, okay, you've shared your EVP and your brand with me.
Here's mine.
Here's mine.
Wow, that's powerful.
Here's mine.
Yes.
So that shouldn't you shouldn't discount that. People today, I don't know, we use words like woke, but people today are thinking about situations we dealt with in a different way. So we need to meet them there as potential employers, which is why the employee experience piece is so critical. And I mean, all the points you just mentioned are so valid. What I've seen in my experience is you'll engage a candidate because we feel that, on paper, this candidate looks great. And this is potentially the kind of person we want to bring into our business. And it's, great in the beginning. It's excitement. It's constant engagement. It's two ways. We're hearing from the candidate. We're inviting them to interviews. Then all of a sudden, you'll find sometimes silence.
Yeah.
And then the candidate is sitting and wondering, okay, what did I do wrong?
What's happening?
This was going so well, and what has changed? Only to find that there's internal processes that are now underway.
Yeah.
That the candidate obviously has no insight into.
Not aware of.
But it's impacting them directly because now there's a feedback gap. There's a time lapse. And while we're trying to resolve our internal, whatever the turmoil is, if it was an approval or if it's a structural thing.
Budget,
hiring manager changes, whatever the case is, but we go silent and then we leave the candidate hanging, essentially. That experience already, it's been broken in the sense that it's no longer positive for the candidate because now they're sitting and dealing with feelings of, are they going to regret me? Was I not good enough? Did I say something wrong? They're not thinking, oh, there might be internal issues that are being dealt with at the moment. So those are the types of failures that companies and HR professionals need to be thinking about. Yes, there can be a change or something that happens that disrupts our process, but we need to keep our candidate engaged. Not because we want to say, here's a job offer for you, but because we value them. We value their time.
Yeah.
We value the fact that they've come and spoken to us, spent time with us, made an effort, traveled from wherever they've traveled from, if it was in person, So the least we can do is just keep them informed of, hey, things are changing internally, but, please bear with us. We're going to need a week or whatever the case is to resolve that. And these are small examples of, how an employee experience can just be ruined, where it was going really well and then all of a sudden something happens and the candidate is left with this feeling of, oh, maybe this is not the company I want to associate myself with. And it can manifest in different ways to lesser or greater extent, that experience. But I think from a talent acquisition and talent attraction perspective, it's really keeping those lines of communications open, making sure that the candidate is engaged at different points, and that even if things change, we still let them know.
Yes.
We don't have to wait until we say, oh, here's an offer for you.
Yeah.
A candidate just wants to know that they know that I'm also, a human and that I have expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree. I often feel that candidates are fine if you just communicate with them. Just keep them in the loop. Now, I can imagine an audience member who might be sitting in a large corporate going, Fran, Penny, how do we do this with thousands? And that's a beautiful segue for me into the next part of our conversation, which is technology and AI and automation, because not everything has to be manual.
Yes.
Like, not hearing anything is much worse than having technology assist HR professionals with reaching volumes and masses. I can't phone 600 graduates waiting, right? I can't do that, but I also don't have to keep quiet. And so from an automation in recruitment perspective, we often now, and we're super confronted with AI at the moment. Like, AI is just everywhere. And one of the big issues currently with the usefulness and utility of AI is the question coming back around, okay, how? How do I use it? I see all the ads. My Instagram and LinkedIn is flooded with AI. Every conference is about AI, but how do I use it? And one of the things that I've seen, and this touches directly and speaks directly to the employee experience piece we just spoke about, is having technology automate the admin-intensive heavy lifting of the process, which takes a lot of time and that can be personalized in a small way through the use of technology.
I couldn't agree more. So when I think employee experience, I think tech as well. For me, the two go hand in hand. To your point, there's a lot of candidates sometimes that we engage, maybe indirectly for roles, but we want to make sure that we can get to the real cream of the crop. The real candidates that align with the organization and what we're trying to build as a business. So when you marry technology into your employee experience journey, there's a win right there. So if you're going to talk about an employee experience that's agile, that's seamless, you have to build technology into that.
Correct.
If technology is not something you're known for as an organization, you need to be thinking about it very quickly.
You need to catch up.
And very intently, and making a concerted effort to bring it into your processes. Because you don't want, to your earlier point, you don't want a candidate to be encumbered with paperwork, a lengthy process, multiple CV platforms where they have to keep inputting the same data. That's not what you want. So you want to have technology that enables your process. You want to have smart technology, so you build in artificial intelligence so that it can do all the heavy lifting. You also don't want your HR professionals sitting with tons and tons of admin, screening CVs.
No.
There's AI for that.
Correct.
And as HR professionals, I feel we really need to embrace the tech. I know there's a level of fear, uncertainty, but it's too late to
the conversation
resist now.
Yeah.
We're in
Just
it.
jump in.
Just jump in, get your feet wet, go on the course you need to go to, understand what AI can do for you, and then, bring it into your processes, position it with your businesses and say, we've looked at our recruitment process or our talent acquisition process. It's too lengthy.
Correct.
It's too admin intensive. The experience is not right. Yeah. This is the tech we need to plug into it to make it more efficient.
From a strategic perspective, I often hear a success metric is reduce time to hire and improve quality. Now, that just happens to be the two unique selling points or propositions of Whamley. And the mistake from the automation perspective is when you over-automate it into a point where it's robotic and it's highly unpersonalized. And so, a small thing where I apply for a role and I get a WhatsApp immediately as opposed to an email. And I open up the WhatsApp and there's a video of the hiring manager welcoming me to the process, explaining to me what the steps are in my journey and telling me how long it will take. That you can scale, but it's not robotic. So that's combining or marrying the human element with the automation reaching the masses, as an example,
yes,
in something that we do. And it's such a small thing with such a massive effect, because people on the receiving end of that go, wow, this is unexpected. It's not just a CV I drop somewhere in a portal, but from a tech perspective, we can reach millions doing that at the same time.
Enhance that experience.
Enhance the experience and create the expectation of what the process is like. Again, to the earlier point, candidates worry less about how long it will take as opposed to, I don't know what's coming next. And when will I hear back from the organization? Yeah. Penny, from there on out, some organizations go into assessments and testing. Now, I know not all organizations assess because it is in some cases expensive, right? Depending on what you use. But what have you seen from a pro and con perspective around using some sort of assessment in your hiring process?
So I'll preface this with, I'm an advocate for psychometric assessment testing. And that's not just because I'm an industrial psychologist. It's because I've had extensive experience with assessments in my career for various different things, whether it be talent acquisition, whether it be, talent development, leadership development. So I have a very close relationship with psychological testing. And in terms of pros, when it's done well and it's done correctly, psychometric assessments can add like such a great layer of depth
and insight
to any people process.
Yes.
So when you think about it like that, it's adding a layer of insight, it's adding a layer of depth, it's giving you more data points to be able to make the right decisions.
Correct.
When it's not done properly, not done correctly, it can be so detrimental, because firstly, it can be used as a way to deny entry for candidates.
Label
Candidates, group candidates, and start to look at candidates in the same way and paint them in the same light.
Yes.
So these are some of the failures when assessments are not used correctly. And often I've seen that to get to that place, they are being used by individuals that are not qualified, that don't have a full understanding or appreciation of what psychometric assessment is all about.
Yeah.
And I know different organizations have different approaches. To your point, it's costly, so not all organizations use it, but there is value in bringing in the right person who knows how to use assessments so that they can use it correctly in a meaningful way.
Yes.
Versus, we train the whole of the HR department, and then nobody ever does the assessments correctly, and then we still bring in an external person to interpret the reports for us, and the candidate is on the losing end.
Did you know WAMI recently launched fully integrated psychometric assessments in your WAMI platform? Personality, cognitive ability, learning agility, team roles, and what motivates the individual in the workspace. So if you want to know more, head over to wami.io or reach out to any of our friendly account managers to learn more about our fully integrated assessments.
For those of you who know me, following my career, massive advocate for it. I started my career in that space. And I think maybe two, three comments from my side around this. Firstly, I think fit for purpose is really important. I often see organizations running the wrong assessment in the wrong application area, developmental assessments for selection purposes, or the other way around.
Or repurposing.
I think the second thing is we, unfortunately in South Africa, maybe globally, but definitely in South Africa from my perspective, we've been conditioned to believe we only have to assess the top 2 candidates at the very end. Now I know, again, preface this on it's costly, but if you look at the data and the validity of assessments, the predictive validity is so high that you actually want to bring it in earlier in the process, especially something like cognitive ability, if we're speaking selection now only. To give that layer, that insight and that depth around making your hiring decision and understanding who progresses in the funnel. So I think if an organization, if you're into assessments, if you can look at where you're using it in the process, I think that's really, really important. And I think the third part of it is to understand that assessments is part of the hiring decision and not to view them in isolation. We as candidates, all humans in the world of work are holistic human beings. And assessments is a beautiful part of the spotlight, but it's not the entire spotlight.
No truer words were spoken. I mean, when I look at hiring managers in my experience using assessments to make the decision in the end, internally I cringe.
Yes.
Like, that's not how we're supposed to be using them. To your point, if they brought in earlier in the process, we get those insights earlier on about our candidates. And then what we can do is we can start probing some of those elements that we've picked up
in the interview
Correct. Process. Then it enhances the conversation. It makes us, it enables us to go into detail or depth around certain components of a person's personality, of a person's problem-solving skills, that are important to us or that we feel would be relevant in our context. Yeah. Yes, there is the cost component. I mean, of course, assessments are not cheap, generally speaking. But like you said, there's fit for purpose. There's different types of assessments that can be used at different points in the recruitment process, right? And there's different providers. I mean, what I've seen is there's so many different providers now that can cater to different needs. So you don't necessarily have to be stuck with your more high-end, expensive, type of assessments that are offered by a very select few organizations. There's a variety.
Correct.
And if you have the right person in your HR environment, they can go and do the research. They can engage with the right people, industrial psychologists, psychometrists, and say, hey, this is our need in our business. How can we solve for this?
Yes.
So then you're already working on a solution that's going to be fit for your business and fit for your budget as well.
Fit for your business, fit for your budget. I love that. Penny, we reached the last part, and that's onboarding, right? So we make the offer, the candidate starts, and I really just have kind of one key theme here from my perspective, and that is often onboarding is a paper exercise. It's not personalized, and it's kind of just going through the motions. And I guess we miss an opportunity to accelerate Penny joining the organization's ability to perform optimally if we neglect the onboarding process.
I think if you don't plan for onboarding your new hire, your new team member, your new recruit, you're honestly setting them up for failure. What they bring is knowledge, experience from previous environments, previous organizations where they've worked. They're bringing that into your business, and you're hiring them because you can see the value that they can add. Yes. But they don't know your context.
Yes.
So how do you close that gap? You need to be intentional and say, we are going to have a 3-month plan for this individual, and we're going to break it down to 30 days. So every 30 days within the first 30 days, this is what's going to happen. These are the people that are involved. The next 30 days, this is what's happening. These are the people involved. And you have to really craft it and be intentional about it.
Yes.
I'm going to deviate a little bit. So I did my mini dissertation a few years back as part of my master's degree. And I explored first-time experiences of South Africans working abroad. So you're a South African, there's an opportunity to go work for either your organization in a different country or a new organization in a different country. And what I investigated was, how do those individuals, make that transition? Firstly, what informs the choice to move? And then once they're there, what are the factors that set them up for success?
Yes.
One of the main things that came out was onboarding, and having a well-planned out onboarding, plan, and making sure that the right individuals were supporting that person. Imagine moving to a new country, you don't know anybody, you've left behind a life that you know very well, and you're going to settle somewhere where you may have never even been before.
Everything's unfamiliar.
The
last thing
culture,
that should be is
language.
the job you moved for.
Yes, the weather, the food. The one thing that can be controlled is the job.
Yes.
And the job environment, or the work environment. So, if you think about it in that sense, that's a huge transition. But similarly, for somebody who's joining a company locally, the same applies. Maybe not the other elements, but definitely that onboarding and making sure that it's well planned and well thought through.
Yeah.
Because then that sets the person up. They know what's expected of them. They know who to engage, who to call upon when they're not sure. And they can settle in relatively quickly, and then we can start seeing the value that they are able to bring.
I can't agree with you more. It's not supposed to be a one-day paper dump exercise. It's a journey. It's a journey tailored to why we are bringing you in. And it's both about the job and the organization, and getting Penny or Fran up to speed as quick as possible so that they can perform the job. And be happy
friction.
And engaged, removing the friction. So yes, let's get the computer and the toilets and the parking sorted, but let's also speak about the values. Let's speak about our way of work. Let's speak about our culture. Let's speak about our social side of the business.
Meeting cadence.
Meeting cadence.
Do we expect you to sit in meetings every day?
Exactly.
No.
Exactly. No.
Yeah.
Exactly. Penny, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience. In my opinion, when I listen to podcasts, I want to get value from it that makes sense, that's practical. I also want to feel like while I'm listening to a podcast that some elements I agree with and some I don't, or it challenges me to think more. And I'm pretty sure that today we did that. I'm pretty sure today that we have had enough touch points around the hiring experience with some golden nuggets and mistakes that I hope audience members could pick up on and go, I think I need to double click on this or zoom in here. I might be doing that thing that Fran and Penny spoke about. Or yes, I'm nailing this thing that they said I should be focusing on. So thank you for sharing that. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with in closing?
In closing, I would like to just talk about empathy. I think in terms of, talent attraction and bringing talent into your business. For me, the number one competency to have and build is empathy. We have found ourselves, in the same process at one point or another, as working professionals. What was your experience? What is it that stood out for you as being really great? What are the feelings you were left with? And what is it that stood out for you that was maybe on the bad side, and things you wouldn't want the next person to experience? I think when we can start thinking about it in a more empathetic manner, we can then build the right processes, and build the right experience for the candidates we want to bring into our business and the talent we want to bring into our business.
At the end of the day, we're all human and we all have emotions and experiences, and we want to simulate that in the way we do everything in human capital management. How we develop, how we recruit, how we onboard, how we engage, how we performance manage. Remember the human. Penny, thank you so much. It's been lovely having you here, and good luck with the rest of your career. We will be in touch, and I will be keeping a close eye on you, and excited to have you on this journey.
Thank you so much, Francois, for having me. This has been really great.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Solving the People Puzzle. If you enjoyed today's episode, can you please go and like, subscribe, and even leave us a 5-star rating? If you have any questions around how to create the ultimate end-to-end hiring solution, head over to whammy.io so that we can help you hire better people faster. Catch you next time.